I wanted to talk to you today about dichotomies, okay? About things that sort of like persist in the marketing, B2B marketing discourse and sales and go-to-market discourse over time, and they stick and they stick, and I want to try to sort of see if, these stuck conversations can we can find a resolution for them and move them forward. And I want to start with inbound marketing. Um, so obviously, already, I'm going to talk about also outbound, inbound versus outbound. But let's start with inbound marketing. Um, there is no question, and I think everybody that at least, the conversations that we have, they almost always start with B2B marketers nowadays. They start with the observation that it's becoming much more challenging to find the audiences, to engage them, to pick and choose from the right channels to do so, to invest in content. All it's becoming harder to effectively execute inbound marketing the way it was, almost invented by HubSpot and sort of popularized in our domain in the past 15 year or 20 years. Um, Everybody's investing in content, SEO, the website, driving traffic with paid, but the ROI, like there's a perception that the ROI is trending downwards. What do you think?
So it's funny because when I speak with outbound marketers, they're also saying, look, outbound is dead and SEO is dead. And I think there's this always this trend, which is, we're doing things. Completely agree that the effectiveness of go to market in general, inbound and outbound, is rapidly decreasing. And if we're trying to uncover the reason, why is this becoming less and less effective? I think that, the main reason is less about the motion, whether it's because I sent an email or it's because I wrote a blog post and got SEO. It's more because of us as humans with our decreasing attention. So us as marketers, now putting the marketer hat, my mission is to capture attention. It's to educate, it's to engage, and then it's to get them to buy. When in the world today, the resource of human attention is becoming so scarce, our challenge is how do you reach that? How do you capture that attention? How do you make sure that you're capturing and holding on it? And I think this is the underlying reason of why why GTM is becoming so much harder, and why we're talking about these conceptions, the breaking of regimes, the breaking of preconceptions. That's why we're starting to question our approaches because we are seeing very diminishing returns from those investments.
Yeah. So you mean, why should we expect our audiences to read a blog post of 800 words, not to mention an ebook of 30 pages, when they barely hold on to a YouTube short or a TikTok video for 15 seconds or 5 seconds before they swipe forward? It's insane to demand that. And yeah, I think the shrinking of attention spans on a global scale is one part of it. I mean, they don't they don't have the attention to get to the point on the CTA buttons on our website. What should we expect? But it is what it is. It's becoming more and more challenging.
And I think the other flip side of decreasing attention is the increased anonymity. Because how do I protect my attention? I put gates and I don't share information and I don't fill forms. And so to be able to address this overwhelming amount of information, I need to preserve the channels that come into me. So I'm not willing to give you my email for an ebook that may tell me something. And even if I do download it, what I'm going to do, I'm probably going to get it to ChatGPT and summarize it for me. And it was written by ChatGPT. So eventually you just have two AIs speaking with each other and two people the size have no idea what's happening there. So it's becoming crazy. And I think that if we're just talking about the operational part of it, is that AI gives us the illusion that we can do so much more and create so much more, but we're not necessarily more effective at capturing more attention. We just feel more effective, but I think a lot of times that's a bit of a misconception. We're not really effective. We may be effective at creating tons and tons of content, but like you said, nobody's going to read that content. So was it really effective?
Yeah, yeah. So so we understand sort of like there's a challenge with inbound. We know we need to invest, but we have these challenges to address. But outbound, to be honest, the outbound motions of go-to markets in B2B, um, I don't think it's in a much better situation right now because what I see, if you ask me, is I see an extreme, exaggerated focus on um, AI to AI driven communication tactics, automations, with no code tool, all these no code tools and like Clay and Make and all these. And there seems like the entire focus has shifted to how we do things and how we scale them and how we automate and how we leverage AI. Leverage, by the way, is a word that AI uses, and I'm not AI. So, but that's where the focus seems to be. So if I'm a go-to-market team leader and I need to decide where, should I be in inbound, which has its own challenges? Should I invest in outbound? Oh, it looks very, very attractive. Everybody's talking, and there's so many tools right now. And I get pitched, Avishai, I get pitched like 3 times a week by founders who are building SDR tools with AI. It's almost like a thing. Um, so, where should I be as a go-to-market leader?
Yeah, I think that a big challenge or a big feeling that we have is we can be more efficient, but we're not necessarily effective. And I think that it always goes down to measuring, first of all, effectiveness before moving to efficiency and scale. AI kind of flipped that and said you can be very, very efficient without realizing or without really understanding if all of these activities are actually effective. And you know what? There's also the risk of not just being ineffective, of being actually harmful. Because if through scale you're actually not providing value to audience or doing things in a non-effective way, you're going to be effectively shutting down those potential channels or prospects. And I think that, when we talked about earlier inbound versus outbound, these dichotomies, right? We want to understand kind of when they started, those terms started, there really were two approaches. There was like inbound SEO, outbound SDRs. And we need to ask ourselves, is this distinction helpful and effective as we're planning our go-to market? Or do we need a new framework? And we talked in the beginning of the conversation of breaking of paradigms. We need to start breaking paradigms, not be afraid of talking about things in a different lens, because these lenses currently are not effective. You try to talk to a CFO and you say we need to invest in outbound versus inbound. They don't understand what you want. They understand, how are you going to help me generate pipeline, or how are you increasing revenue for the company? That's a discussion that needs that needs to happen. And I think that what we need to think about is, how do we reconcile these activities in a new framework, describe them better, or provide new approaches for them. But let me ask you, you're working with a lot of B2B companies. You're seeing kind of a wide angle view. What are the things or the motions that you are seeing with regards to inbound, outbound, that you do see that are becoming more effective, or you have seen them kind of bring more fruit?
So I think one is orchestration, like the thought, whether it's outbound or inbound. Usually it's a combination of both, and the thought going and the thinking and the planning going into orchestrating these motions together is sort of like a balance shifter, a difference maker. And that's one thing I've noticed, because the bar to initiate today using tools like, I don't know, La Growth Machine or tools like that to initiate a combined email and LinkedIn outreach sort of campaign is so low that everybody's deploying it. And if everybody's deploying it, that means, again, there's increased noise. Your competition is probably there just like you are. How do you create a difference? And I think smart orchestration and sort of proactively thinking about merging, your outbound marketing and your outbound, outreach, and combining that with smart inbound, that's where the difference is, in my opinion. One of them. You?
I, I I think that marketers, us, if I can call us in general, kind of the group of marketers, I think in the past, we typically got a new tool and we abused the hell out of it, right? We got email, and what happened? We spammed the shit out of contacts. Then, it's LinkedIn, and I'm seeing the same thing in LinkedIn. LinkedIn is being overwhelmed and overrun and overused in a way that it's becoming harder and harder to get attention. Same thing with AI. And I think the tolerance for abuse from the buyer side is really decreasing. If you do a motion that is not abusive in the sense that you're using things that are illicit, but you're not giving value. What is abuse? Abuse is not really giving me anything valuable. I think that that is going to be very hard to get for the companies to move. And I think we need to be very mindful, and maybe orchestration. We're going to talk a bit later about possible solutions, but it is really being mindful of the buyers, of their experience, and not just thinking that quantity will win the game. It's no longer a numbers game. I think we've moved past a numbers game. It has to be quality engagements, quality interactions, and thoughtful. To your point, I think the view of an orchestration of an account, of a go-to-market, has to be much more deliberate and sophisticated than, okay, we're going to blast this, we're going to blast that, we're going to blast this. Yes, they're going to block us, but we're going to have 0.005% that are going to click yes. And we're not in the business of capturing micro interactions. B2B, big buying committee, most of it anonymous, 10, 15 people, with internal discussions, increased enemy, all that stuff. Brute force is not going to cut it here.
No, no, it's not. Um, and yet, and yet, again, coming back to the go-to-market leader, whoever needs to decide now what to recommend to their management to do in 2025, which is right around the corner, is what do we recommend them? What do we tell them? So we spoke about the dichotomy of inbound versus inbound, and sort of the solution being somewhere amorphous a little bit in between that we need to define better maybe. But there's another dichotomy, and that is, brand versus demand. So the thing I don't want to get into, and yet I keep seeing it online. You mentioned LinkedIn, by the way. So on LinkedIn all the time is, should we invest more in brand, or should we invest more in demand generation? Brand awareness versus demand generation. And this almost philosophical sort of academic thing is, it comes and goes. It's like a wave of, periodically you have more of this discussion, and then I don't know, somehow it comes down. And I feel like we are in a peak now, where the pendulum is actually swung a little bit towards the brand awareness side, and I see more, which is, by the way, not a bad thing in itself. Some disillusionment with the promise of highly measurable, predictable demand generation, at the expense of investing in brand recognition and brand impact, and becoming, a category leader and part of the default consideration set for the category. And now we're shifting there. We're shifting towards, at least on discourse, I'm still not seeing it enough on the ground in the conversation I have with actual practitioners. There seems to be a shift towards brand. But again, we said it's those shifts, they're not productive, right? You said it. It's not a productive conversation to have. It's obvious that it's somewhere in the middle. So again, what is it? I mean, is there a framework that we can apply that hands us the best demand capture levers, and sort of avoids the whole conundrum of brand versus demand? So what is
Yeah,
it?
yeah. I think it's just as our previous discussion on inbound versus outbound. I'm like picturing in my head a car driving along a road. Okay, we have a car driving along the road. Now, we're constantly focusing on the question, do I shift right to demand? Do I shift left to brand, right? Or do I shift right for inbound or left for outbound? The question is not, do I tilt right or left? It's where's the road? And how do I stay on the road, right? And I have these different levers, I have these different motions, but what I need to make sure is that I'm staying on the road. The big challenge, right, is how do you communicate what is the road, for example, to leadership, so that they understand that these activities are necessary to stay on the road, as opposed to framing it, I need money to turn right. Nobody's going to give you money to turn right or turn left or go up or down, because nobody cares about that motion. That's in your court. They want to know that you're on the track. And I think you need to provide, you as a GTM leader, need to provide visibility and give those high beams that says, this is the road that we're seeing. This is why I want us to drive there. And what we're doing is actually getting us there. Okay, now we can also accelerate because I know where the road is. I have a view. I know that I'm not falling off a cliff. And the problem is a lot of times, especially in light of those changes, marketers feel like they're always on the verge of a cliff. They don't really know where they're driving. And so they're always kind of damage control or credit wars of trying to justify that they influenced the deal or didn't influence it. It's not a productive discussion. You are a co-pilot sitting next to the CEO and telling them, look, this is the road that we need to go. You're the navigator, right? You need to get them to understand that road from a GTM perspective. And so again, going to brand versus demand, they're the same thing from a buyer perspective. In that lens, they're meshed up, right? A buyer doesn't go thinking I'm finished engaging with the brand. Now I'm going to engage with the demand. I need the product. So I think that to be more practical of what I'd recommend or seek brands or companies, B2B companies do, because the majority of them don't have the ability to brand a Coca-Cola like brand, right? We're not able to generate those,
Those
those. What we
AI-driven
can
campaigns,
create.
yes, like they
Yes,
do.
I think that I think that what we are need to be focusing on is the ability to say something interesting to our audience, to create an experience or messaging that resonates and that communicates with their interests, and through that build that perception of our brand, as opposed to just change a logo. We both have seen companies spend so much time on rebranding, on the color of the logo, and a lot of things that feel super super dramatic, but at the end of the day I think buyers really don't really see through that. So the demand capturing part, we know that, right? We know you have to have those mechanisms in place to convert interest into intent and intent into pipeline. Um, of course they're all important, but going back to the question, where's the road and how do we stay on it?
Yeah, you mentioned interesting. You mentioned interest and intent, and I'm thinking it's almost like another dichotomy or another sort of like scales where, but these one are relatively newer, where a GTM leader says, okay, where should I get more? Wait, should I get my intent from third parties? Should I get it from my own data, first party data? What about second party data? Intent, interest, how do I balance it? And is there a way for me to sort of drive that car straight ahead without veering too much to the right of the left or the left in that regard as well? What's the framework?
So I think that when we're talking about how buyers buy, and this is again going back to when I first heard of ABM and the promise of ABM. We're going to talk about a little bit about that, but I think intent came about largely because of ABM sold this concept
Yes.
of, we will tell you which companies are in the market for your product. Now, it's a really amazing promise.
Target them.
But the problem is, yeah, there's one small problem with that promise, is that now today we have data. We know that only about 3 to 5% of your addressable market is going to be in market at any given point. So that's going to be a very, very small percentage of your addressable market. And if you just focus on these companies, you're probably already too late. So even if I gave you a list of all the companies that are now looking to buy a product in your domain and they haven't heard of you, and you haven't been able to capture their attention with interesting topics and information, your ability to influence them will be probably be zero, close to zero. You may get a chance, and there's always this kind of fluke, and there's always a story. If I just wrote them an email and they were just in the process of finding a solution and it came at the right time, right? That's the outlier. That's not happening
Avishai,
anymore. So I would
I wrote a
yeah.
playbook on how to write the email that generated me 75,000 meetings in 1 week. Just comment playbook below with a cool emoji, and I'll send it to you in the email. Okay?
Get it over. I can't wait to read it. No, I think that it's really about that. It's really about that understanding that we need to again shift the focus from not intent versus interest. How are we valuable and engaging with our audience, especially at that 95% mark, right? That's the majority of the time that they're not looking to buy, but we are able to capture their attention with and capture and talk about topics that they're interested in. I think that most of the time we're not talking about buying products. We don't care about products. And again, this is coming from a vendor. Rarely is somebody really passionate about a specific product. They care about their problems, they care about topics. And in that sense, that's where they'll spend probably the majority of their time trying to figure out how they be more successful, trying to learn approaches and new methodologies. And I think companies need to reinvent themselves as not just thought leaders in the space. That's definitely something that they need to pay attention to. But how are they contributing and making themselves heard under those topics of interest that their target audience and their buying personas would be interested in? And again, we're breaking that line between intent and interest, right? It's not that dichotomy there. And that's something else that we can talk a little bit about what are possible solutions there. But Idan, I wanted to ask you about, because you're producing content for B2B companies and you're in charge of their GTM. What are you seeing in that discussion between intent or interest? Is that something that's taking place? You mentioned it's early stages. What are your discussions with leadership look like?
It's not very new. Just compared to the previous dichotomies we mentioned, it's newer. I think definitely the conversation is being dominated by vendors still. It's still a platform dominated like area where it's almost like I feel like sometimes I'm in a race into who will get to the budget owner faster in order to make them weigh the promises that they hear from the vendors better before committing. And I still see that happening all the time. They buy that promise that you mentioned. They buy into the ability to select accounts because it solves so many. It seems these platforms they promise to solve so many areas of go-to-market, right? Account selection, targeting, engagement, signaling, collecting all sorts of intent signals together, sending you the information, activating your salespeople. There's so much into it that it's very, very attractive. The offering is very, very attractive. So I feel like it's still very dominated by the ABM platforms like Sixth Sense and G2 and these, and Zoom Info is in the game as well, and everybody's mentioning intent now, and for a while. And for us as consultants, as go-to-market consultants, it's always the battle of just bringing the conversation back into, one, practicality, and two, effectiveness in relation to your resources, your assets, your ability to execute, the ability of your sales team to get those activation signals and react to them in a proper way. So that's sort of like a tension I see, but definitely, I mean, for me, definitely if we spoke about the different dichotomies, the most effective framework that ties them all together to me is account-based marketing, is ABM, or at least as part of that, the marketing side of things and the sales enablement side of things. I'm not talking about the entire, ABX sort of like a gamut, but focusing on more the marketing side. What do you think? I mean, what's your thoughts on ABM in that regard?
I, yeah, I think that well, we have a challenge with leadership and I think we're not putting enough emphasis on education. And goes to, VP marketing CMOs discussions with CEOs, it goes with consultants. I think there's always a rush to execution, going to your point about technology. Well, we have a problem, let's bring technology to solve it. But if we don't understand the framework, we don't understand the fundamentals, we are going to be very efficient but ineffective. And that's going to create a lot of frustration, right? We can do a lot of things. We can send, for example, tons of emails. We became very efficient at sending mass emails, but we know that that's not going to be effective. In the same sense, rushing to technology or playbooks or just execution without a foundation of understanding of why we're doing this, of what are the things that we're trying to influence, and how we're going to measure them and demonstrate them that we're on the right path. I think that's something that's still lacking in many companies. And also, ABM is not a magic wand. It's not going to be the solution to the problem of your GTM problems. It is a part of that. It could be a part of that solution, but I think it has to start with kind of re-education of what is go-to-market today. And I think, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience, until I really kind of went in and got my hands dirty in seeing this, I still was under the impression that it was just about a solid execution of proven playbooks. Because when you look at sales methodology, it is still largely about execution of those well-trodden playbooks, right? The medic account and how to move a deal through the pipeline and how to engage the buyer. Those things and that one-to-one relationship haven't evolved dramatically because that one-to-one relationship hasn't changed. It's still a person-to-person. But marketing isn't a person-to-person. It's a one-to-many or one-to-few relationship. And that has dramatically changed with the information revolution. And it's such a different environment that if we go straight to the solution without the education and preparing the ground of internally, right, of our sales teams, CS teams, leadership, financial, whatever, do that work, I think anything that we'll bring afterwards is not going to be very effective. We have to lay that and then explain and say, okay, we want to try this approach or that approach. We want to see if it keeps us on track, or if not, we're going to change. Specifically, I think with regards to ABM, a big transition I think we're seeing is more companies that want to try or think this could be a good solution for them are still hesitant because of the perception of ABM as a big, massive, expensive play that only the very top can start and do. And I think they miss out on the opportunities that the ABM approach can give them. And that's why I think there is a problem. Those two things of technology and approach are tied together under ABM, and I think that's not a healthy thing. We need to break it apart. Say there are ABM fundamentals you can start doing even as a 15, 20, 30 people startup. And there are things that you can help scale there. And I think that it's really going back about, first of all, showing the roadmap. Why are we doing anything, or what do we want to do there?
Agreed. You can do a lot of ABM when you're small, and we have still a way to go in educating our market to think about it in very sort of tight terms and expand it as you're allowed to expand it, or as you yourself grow. But there's still you mentioned that it's still not a magic wand, right? And I totally agree. The thing I see is that I find it like to be the most effective framework of those available in order to execute go to market in relatively complex B2B buyer scenarios or a considered purchases scenario and buyer groups. But there's still that gap between the fact that you're generating motions against a market who, no matter what, a vast majority of that market is not in, at any given moment in time, is not in market to buy the solution. So whatever it is you want to sell them. So I think the key has to do about, knowing them, measuring their interest and their intent as they do their own research and come to you. And I know you've done a great job of avoiding talking about Trendyman so far, but I know that from my experience, there are ways that your platform um, can help us in that regard of, an ABM strategy. What Give me an example, like what can it do to solve that, gap?
So I think when I think about really the core of ABM, it is really about shifting your point of view from what is the account seeing and doing, and what does the account care, and what are the ways I can get some of those signals to help me understand about those accounts. So, as opposed to thinking about us as marketers and what can we do to push information, it shifts the focus about, do I understand my buyer and how can I understand my buyer better, and then cater to their needs. And that shift in approach that puts the spotlight on them, not on how do I push more stuff out, but how do I listen more intently, right? And this is, I think, the big shift that we are talking and working together on is improving our listening ability. So looking at ABM, not just from a media perspective or a content perspective, not from our operational
Mm,
perspective, but how do I learn about the needs and interests of my target audience to influence my activities in a very targeted way. And I think, we talked about the dichotomies, right? Inbound, outbound, brand demand, interest, intent. I think that ABM has a potential to solve for those discrepancies and dichotomies, and kind of bring a solution by changing the perspective to the buyer, right? The buyer doesn't care inbound, outbound. The buyer doesn't care brand demand. The buyer doesn't care intent, interest. They care about their problems and their journey, and it is the marketer's mission to surround them with that relevant information and experiences to move them forward. So I think it starts with understanding that there are a lot of signals that you don't need to invest tons of money or resources to get to them. There is going to be an effort to build a picture out of them. That's definitely the challenge now, because there's a lot of noise, and it's about how do I create a map from that noise and an understanding of where I am, where I'm going. And then I think it's pretty easy because you pretty much already know, okay, I understand it, what's happening. I can start doing those steps to show that I'm moving in the right direction. So I would open the conversation on ABM beyond the technology side, beyond the vendor side. Again, speaking from a vendor perspective, I think vendors are not the solution. It's a solution that will come from work between service providers like Envy, uh, with platforms and with the customers. I think that is kind of this collaborative motion that we'll see more and more, and that it will need to be effective because it's going to be a team. This GTM is going to be a team
oh yeah,
effort
oh yeah.
to execute.
I loved what you
Definitely.
said about listening. I think a lot of this, a big part of the solution to again, that metaphor of driving straight to the destination in the car, um, has about maybe start listening more to your rider, to your, passenger, instead of, the client that you're taking along for the ride, or your organization, if you are the go-to-market leader of that organization, and just listen, listen to what, the market tells you, listen to what your audience is telling you, your clients, your customers, instead of relying on somebody else to give you those signals, instead of paying exorbitant amount of money to the platforms where you think they are. Just see how much you can get out of them explicitly or implicitly to inform your go-to-market decision. It's that listening thing that I like. Bring the customer voice, to you, as much as you can. Um, I think that
Yeah,
makes a difference. Yeah.
I just I just want to give an example, and again, without veering too much into the AI space. But one place that AI can help us listen more than just generate information. And one of the things that we're doing with Trendyman is really using AI to learn from the journey, from the content. What are the interests and the levels of intent in a scalable way? Because that's a big gap. How do I listen at scale, right? I know how to create content at scale, but how do I listen at scale? And I think if we're able to turn those signals into a picture effectively, and I think AI has a real role there and a really effective role because it helps us process information better. I think that's one direction that companies can be innovative in and really help their go-to-market scale because they can, again, increase their listening capabilities, like expanding now their view much further and seeing much beyond the horizon what is really happening there, and not in an isolated view. I think the big problem is if I just get isolated signals, it's very hard for me to get a picture. I get these points and say they're an intent or they're a star. I don't really know what to do with this information. But if I'm starting to build a holistic view of my customer, my target customers, my target market, and I'm starting small, maybe a very small segment, maybe a very small niche of it, but I understand what they're interested in. I understand where they are, what they read, what they don't read. That allows me to then start scaling to maybe other verticals or other domains with that understanding. And using, again, we're talking about using first party data then, right? We're not talking about anything that is kind of science fiction. This is stuff that you have lying around. This is stuff you have on your website or in your CRM or in your marketing automation. This is existing data that just needs to be more easily connected and contextualized to give that picture. So I think that's something that I'll be optimistic of because we talked a lot about breakings of stuff. There's some things new that we can also build. But I think it just goes to the fact that with all AI, it just shows how being human and authentic and having real conversations, real relationships, and building trust is becoming so much more precious and the differentiator between the companies that will succeed versus those that
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. AI, AI, I. Um, Great. So Avishai, we covered, sort of like prevailing dichotomies in our space and the discourse, and we spoke about ABM. I think we agree that ABM is a good framework. I mean, what would be sort of like a parting thought? What would be your conclusion, like, if you had to summarize it from our discussion? Like one thing.
Well, for my personal, yeah, um, from one thing I'd say for me, for at least from my point of view, the things that we start to do more aggressively over the past year, and again, it may be like an hyperbole or a bit cliche, but I think a and maybe a few topics, if I may. One, embracing change as the default. So change is the constant, right? That is one thing that I think we need to understand and kind of drill into our heads in that sense that the things are going to be rapidly changing. We need agility in our organizations to be effective. So agility is a core strength that needs to be developed and has to be created. The other part that we talked in short about it, about differentiators. How do you differentiate in a noisy market? We're all operating in super noisy markets. And I think the aspect of advocacy, of relationships and partnerships, which in the
Mm,
past may have been kind of a side dish. When you talked about go to market, we have the direct and we have maybe a small percentage that we do through partnerships. We've discovered that partnerships are a fundamental part of go to market and advocacy and ambassadorship and people that will talk about you when you're not in the room, in that sense. And that is something that I think GTM leaders need to prioritize, and they need to educate leadership, CEOs, CROs, onto why those investments today are so critical. So these are kind of things that I would have top of mind, and what's it in 25. What about you? What are your thoughts, takeaways?
Um, I think um, there's talk, there's the sort of like dialectical, if you will, sort of aspect of what we do professionally, and there are the things that work. And I'm interested equally in both. I think understanding what kind of factors go into a decision that go-to-market teams need to make is as important as, advising them on the right, on the course to take, or suggesting a particular tool to them. It's as important. Um, I'm I'm curious. I want to see those levers in action. I'm still, I think that maybe that's a topic for another conversation, but let's think about, or let's invest more time in finding those actual levers that work, that can, bring things from the theoretical to the practical. Um, as a general, not particular to this conversation, but as a general in our profession, focusing on what those little things that keep us on the straight path.
I think so. I think we have an agenda for our
Oh
next
yeah,
talk that's going to be talking about solutions. Because we just talk about problems now, so everybody's going away feeling kind of depressed. Our world is
yeah,
changing, but I think that definitely in
absolutely,
we,
absolutely.
cool. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.